From fallen pop star Ian Watkins to fellow paedophile Richard Huckle to prison serial killer Robert Maudsley to Austin Powers actor Joseph's son and to the other 6 cases covered in this video, prison murders are nothing new. Let's start with the very lost Ian Watkins himself. 25-year-old Rashid Geddle, known as Rico Geddle, who is already doing a life sentence for murder, and 43-year-old Samuel Dodsworth, who's doing 24 years for a vicious set of grapes that involved kidnap and false imprisonment, have both since been charged with the murder of notorious child you-know-what abuser Ian Watkins. A drug debt owed by Watkins to the 2 perpetrators appears to be, if rumours are to be believed, why the former pop star was done away with. Just after 9:30 a.m. on the Saturday in question then, as soon as cells were unlocked, the 2 perpetrators pounced, stabbing Watkins in the neck and catching his jugular vein. When emergency services rapidly arrived, they pronounced Watkins dead. On Tuesday, the 14th of October 2025, both men were due to make their first court appearance, Leeds Crown Court being where. Dodsworth appeared via video link from HMP Wakefield, but Geddle, in contrast, refused to attend the remote hearing. Notwithstanding, Judge Guy Curl, the recorder of Leeds, set a provisional date of May the 5th, 2026 for the trial, which is expected to last 2 to 3 weeks. As the singer from rock band Lostprophets, Watkins was once one of Wales's most famous pop stars. At the height of their fame, the group sold millions of albums worldwide. All along, though, Watkins was leading a disgusting double life, getting himself jailed for 29 years in December 2013 after admitting a string of child bleep offences, including the attempted grape of the 11-month-old baby of one of his fans. His arrest came following the execution of a drugs warrant at his Pontypridd home on September the 21st, 2012, when a large number of computers, mobile phones and storage devices of his were seized and examined. In 2019, Watkins got 10 months added to his 29 years after he was found guilty of possessing a mobile phone in prison. In 2023, he suffered his first prison attack, but unlike with the second prison attack, he didn't sustain any life-threatening injuries. During his time in prison, like many other high-profile inmates around the world, he got stacks of fan mail and apparently had, at the time of his death, a very young girlfriend. Now viewer, if I've got you hooked on the video so far, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'll appreciate you. From starring in Austin Powers in 1997 to getting banged up for 27 years, Joseph's son, an actor and martial artist who was born in 1970 in South Korea, is another celebrity who chose a twisted path that culminated in someone's killing. In Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery, Son played Random Task, a parody of the James Bond character Oddjob. This was also the man's last film role. Previously, Son had appeared in several low-budget action films where he was either the main character or was cast in a supporting role. While cinema-goers were enjoying the actor's role-playing in his different films, they were wholly unaware of the man's true nature. On Christmas Eve 1990, you see, Son and his mate, Santiago Gayton, bundled a woman, who we'll call Layla, into their car, repeatedly graped her both the front way and the back way, tortured her and pistol whipped her before pushing her out of the car naked and driving off. Both perpetrators got away with their crimes for nearly 2 decades, during which period Son was able to enjoy both his acting career and his martial arts career. Son's S-bleep X offences of December 1990 unravelled in 2008 after he was arrested for kicking in the door of his roommate's car. The man got probation plus 60 days in jail for that offence. More importantly by far, however, the DNA sample that was duly taken from him while he was in police custody matched with the sample obtained from Layla when she reported her monstrous attack. This led eventually to convictions for both Gayton and Son in relation to this attack, Son's life sentence coming in September 2011. Less than a month into this sentence, for reasons that I can't trace, Son battered his cellmate, S-bleep ex-offender Michael Graham, to death. I don't know why it took until 2017 for the perpetrator to stand trial for that killing, but the outcome of the trial was Son's conviction for voluntary manslaughter, for which the former actor got another 27 years. Born in May 1986 and raised in a middle-class family in Kent, southeast England, Richard Huckle was a quiet, church-going man who came, like Ian Watkins, to live a sordid double life. After leaving education, Huckle spent a gap year from 2005 to 2006 in Malaysia. He returned to that country regularly, helping out at local churches and in the local communities before moving there in 2010. While working as both a Christian missionary and freelance photographer, Huckle raped a number of people aged 3 to 13, made dozens of indecent images of those sorts of people, and created a PDF file manual to help others commit the same disgusting crimes. Following a tip-off from an Australian law enforcement agency, on the 19th of December 2014, Huckle was arrested by officers from the National Crime Agency at Gatwick Airport and questioned on suspicion of his serious offences against very, very, very young people. It took until January 2016 to get the man to plea, not guilty having been his plea, and then, following his change of plea to guilty in relation to most of his charges, that plea change coming in April 2016, 3 whole days for his sentencing hearing, which took place in June 2016, to be carried out. He got life with a minimum of 25 years, but only got through the first 3 years and 4 months of that sentence, the man being found dead in his cell at HMP Fosse Sutton in the East Riding of Yorkshire, North England, on the 13th of October 2019. After a 4-day trial, on the 23rd of November 2020, Paul Fitzgerald, an inmate with an official diagnosis of psychopathy, who was doing time for a very serious act of SA, was found guilty of Huckle's murder, the jury having only taken an hour to reach their verdict. The court had learned that Fitzgerald had subjected Huckle to a lengthy torture, binding the man's hands and feet and gagging the man's mouth before strangling the ex-missionary with an electric cable, graping him, breaking his jaw, penetrating him the back way with a kitchen utensil, and then stabbing a pen with a blade attached to it into the man's brain via his nose, which prepares you quite nicely for the upcoming case of Robert Maudsley. Stay tuned. In addition, Fitzgerald later admitted that he had wanted to cook and eat parts of Huckle's body following the attack, which again sets you up quite neatly for the horrific crimes of Robert Maudsley, which are coming next. Stay with me. I don't know why Fitzgerald did what he did or how he was able to do what he did without prison staff knowing, but the day after he was found guilty of Huckle's murder, he got life with a minimum of 34 years. Having served, as at the time of this recording, all of 51 years in prison, 4-time killer Robert Maudsley is, of course, the UK's longest serving prisoner. Maudsley was born in Merseyside in 1953 and he had the most abusive and horrific domestic background that you can imagine, and shockingly, most of the acts of SA and violence that were perpetrated on him by his father were instigated by his mother. Eventually, Maudsley left home, tried to kill himself, became a drug addict, became a prostitute, and then in 1974 he murdered one of his punters because that punter showed him pictures of the children that he'd committed SA on. So then Maudsley was deemed unfit to stand trial and was sent instead to Broadmoor Hospital. In 1977 he and another patient murdered another patient, and that patient just happened to be a child. You know what are. They locked him in his cell for hours, they tortured him, they killed him. Maudsley reckoned that he had eaten some of the man's brain because he had pushed a spoon into the man's eardrum, and I think it had literally come out of the man's head in another place. It was later proven that he didn't cannibalise the guy, but the nickname Hannibal the Cannibal stuck with him ever since. After that murder, he was suddenly deemed fit for trial and he was convicted and he was sent to Wakefield. And sure enough, in 1978, the year after he committed the murder at Broadmoor, he committed another 2 murders. His plan for the day was in fact to commit 7, but he only managed 2. Some years after, in 1983, he was given his own special home. People call it a glass cage. I don't think it was made of glass. It was basically a prison within a prison. It was an underground cell and he was all on his own there. And whenever he was allowed out for his hour a day of exercise, he had to have at least 4 prison guards with him. He asked at one point in the early 2000s to be allowed to kill himself by poisoning himself with cyanide. The authorities said no. He said, well, in that case, can I please have a budgie? They said no. In early 2025, he was moved to a prison which is a much more normal prison, HMP Whitemore. He's on a special wing there, but he's not on his own anymore. He's not in this underground cage, which was literally built just for him. Apparently, he doesn't even want to get out of prison, but since he was given a whole life order many years ago, that, how shall I put it, isn't even a consideration. In May 2008, up in Huddersfield, West Yorkshire, 21-year-old Subhan Anwar murdered Sanam Nafsakar, the 2-year-old daughter of his then partner, Zabina Nafsakar. He got life with a minimum of 23 years. Gary Smith, who was born in 1965, did his first murder alongside another man in 1998. Lee Newell, who was born in 1969, became a murderer in 1988 when he murdered his 56-year-old neighbour. Both Smith and Newell got a life sentence with a minimum term, but then, in February 2013 at HMP Lartin, they jointly strangled Subhan Anwar to death with his own pyjamas in his cell. I don't know what their motive was, but this second murder of theirs got them both a whole life order, prison with no chance of parole. In an ironic twist, Newell was himself nearly kicked to death in November 2014, nearly 2 years after he murdered Subhan Anwar, by fellow double murderer and fellow whole lifer Gary Vinter. Vinter stands at a huge 6 foot 7 inches tall, by the way. Newell doesn't. This act of Vinter's was the man's way of protesting not having yet got the transfer to a prison with a better gym that he had requested months before. Vinter got another life sentence for that attack, while Newell got 85,000 quid compensation. If you happen to be wondering who, in 2011, stabbed Roy Whiting, the man who kidnapped and murdered 8-year-old Sarah Payne in Surrey, South England in 2000, with a sharpened toilet brush handle before kicking and punching the man as he lay on the floor, it was Gary Vinter. The August 2024 murder of Mahir Rahman, also known as Mahir Mohammed, whose perpetrators were sentenced in May 2025, was caught on CCTV. The victim, 31-year-old Sudanese national, who said he had been terrorised by fellow inmates because he was doing 35 weeks for an SHEX offence, was discovered at 7:53 a.m. on the 20th of August 2024 at HMP Fosse Way, which is in Leicestershire. And that discovery, 7:53 a.m, came around half an hour after 2 other inmates were seen on CCTV entering the man's cell while another held the cell door closed. In May 2025, 19-year-old Ashiri Smith was sentenced to life with a minimum of 17.5 years in prison after being found guilty of the murder of Mr. Abdul Rahman. I think I'll just call him Abdul Rahman from now on. Meanwhile, Thierry Robinson, aged 21, got 11 years after being found guilty of Abdul Rahman's manslaughter. There was a third defendant, 38-year-old Sean Karim, but he was cleared of all charges. The trial heard that Abdul Rahman had asked to move cells beforehand because he didn't feel safe on the day before he was killed, with his cause of death being given as a fatal bleed at the base of his brain. Following an incident the previous day in which Abdul Rahman allegedly threw water from a kettle at Smith and Robinson, CCTV showed the pair entering his cell after it was unlocked by a prison officer who continued on their morning rounds. In the footage, Robinson, as I say, that one was found guilty not of murder but of manslaughter, could be seen grinning as he and Smith made their way to Abdul Rahman's cell, where they spent around 37 seconds. Another inmate told a prison officer that she should check on Abdul Rahman, and she found him slumped in the cell, and although attempts were made to resuscitate him, he was pronounced dead at 8:44 a.m. Billy White. He murdered his girlfriend, Lucy Aries, in 2015, and then he got sentenced to 15 years as the minimum term of his life sentence. But then when he was in prison, like others before him, he murdered a fellow prisoner, someone called Brett Rogers. And the man himself was a convicted murderer. But as I say, murderers murdering other murderers, it's still murder, and it doesn't make any of them a hero. This was, again, at HMP Lartin, which is in Worcestershire. He got a whole life order in 2017. Russell Oliver, another prisoner who's inside for murder and commits a murder again while inside. On the 31st of May 2015, Russell Oliver, who was then aged 46, attacked another prisoner called John York in his cell at the high security prison HMP Lartin. York himself was jailed for life in 2013 for beating a man to death. He died from the head injuries that Oliver inflicted on him. Oliver got his whole life order in 2016. A 44-year-old inmate who we'll call Luke from HMP Whitemore in Cambridgeshire is, as at the time of this recording, under investigation over the murder of 63-year-old fellow inmate John Mansfield, the killing having taken place on the 13th of April 2025. Why Luke allegedly did what he did, I can't say. A murderer himself, Mansfield had a history of violence against other prisoners and was housed in the Close Supervision Centre, CSC, at Whitemore when he died. Many of those held in CSCs are guilty of repeated attacks on fellow inmates. And sure enough, in 2011, Mansfield was convicted of wounding a fellow prisoner at HMP Manchester, or HMP Strangeways as it's more commonly known, with a chair leg. Then, in 2014, he was handed a life sentence for slashing a fellow prisoner 7 times with a broken dinner plate at HMP Fosse Sutton. Before the said offences of his, Mansfield had already racked up over 70 convictions, the most serious of which being his act of stabbing to death his 63-year-old neighbour, Anne Alfonso, in Whalley Range, Manchester, on the 14th of August 2006. His motive for his act was to nick a tiny amount of cash from the victim. For that murder, in May 2007, the perpetrator got life with a minimum of 30 years, only to die 18 years later as a victim of murder himself. The inquiry that sprang from the murder of 49-year-old Taras Nykolyn, a convicted killer, at HMP Woodhill in June 2018, found that the prison in question failed to conduct thorough searches before Nykolyn was executed with undetected weapons in an exercise yard. Stephen Borman, Jibril Rahim and James Brabs were each jailed for life in 2019 for the murder of Ukrainian national Nykolyn, who was himself serving a sentence for manslaughter. After killing Nykolyn, the 3 murderers tried to behead the man's corpse. An inquest jury found a failure in the control and monitoring of razor blades issued to prisoners from the canteen. During sentencing of the trio, Mrs. Justice Whipple said that the ferocity and speed of violence was shocking. This was a planned execution by the defendants in cold blood. Before a sufficient number of prison officers equipped with necessary personal protective equipment were able to enter the exercise yard, 25 minutes had elapsed, by which time Mr. Nykolyn was dead. That was all a quotation. It's also been accepted that the searching of prisoners on the unit was poor, with omissions in checking items, and prisoners were given scope to distract staff. There was also insufficient training of staff in search techniques, with staff having to rely on initial training often received many years previously. There was also a failure to review risk assessments after a significant event on the unit that had occurred, of course, before Nykolyn's murder. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.